Well, I'll tell you what, I'll leave this studio for 5 minutes. The Middle East is on fire. I want to talk about it. Let's go. So the major battle has finally happened. Israel has finally tackled Iran's nuclear weapons program. This has been in the works for a really long time. Israel has been planning for this. Iran and the United States were negotiating at the time that this occurred. This has been a question mark for a really long time. Would Israel go after the Iranian nuclear weapons program? And if so, what would that mean for the region? I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the tactical implications of this. I'm going to talk about the strategic side of it. And I'll talk about the political aspects as well. And we'll just talk about US entering the war. We're now on the sixth day of the conflict. The opening gambit that was fired by Israel included three really interesting components. They used surprise, they focused on air superiority, and they went for counter leadership operations. So with surprise, one of the things they did, they've actually been filtering agents into Iran since 2007. Some of these agents were able to deliver, assemble, and prepare drones to target Iranian missile assets, including air-to-air defenses that are in that region. This included not just drones, it included cyber warfare capabilities as well. So the ability of Israel to do this with a low-tech platform in the very early stages of the war accounted for something like 15% of their missile capability and also a fair percentage of their air-to-air capability. 6 days into the war, Israel now has achieved what you would call air superiority, which is such an important component of any battle. You've seen the opposite of this in Ukraine, where the Russians were unable to achieve any form of air superiority, and it's just resulted in a grinding battle over time. The Israelis are in a position now where they do have air superiority. They're expecting up to 1,000 ballistic missiles in response to their attack. They were able to effectively neutralize using surprise to the point where there was only about 150 missiles fired in the initial volleys. And this was done when Iran was actually negotiating with the United States. So Iran was caught napping in this case, and Israel's taken full advantage over this. So the concentration on air superiority is a big one. It just means that Israel is now able to basically search the skies and deliver effects anywhere in Iran without worrying about air-to-air capabilities interfering with their operations. The reason it's significant is because it frees up any sort of ground operations or covert operations or anything you want to do that requires air cover. They can now achieve that pretty simply and not have to worry too much about it. So the third part I mentioned was counter leadership operations. This was really, really impressive, extremely technical, and once again, through over a decades really of preparation for this moment, Israel were able to target the leadership of the Iranian Quds force. So what I'm hearing is one of the things they're able to do is use a deception campaign to try and coordinate a meeting of the missile forces commanders and the IRGC commanders during this early stage of the war. These cyber communications were sent out, a dummy meeting was planned. When that meeting occurred, the Israelis were waiting to target the bunker facility that they were in. They ended up killing the missile commanders, the UAV commanders, the air-to-air artillery commander in that opening blow of the war. There were no commanders available to give the orders to fire whatever missiles they prepared. So this was a stunning blow at the very start of the war that undoubtedly saved a lot of lives, at least on the Israeli front. It meant they weren't able to target Israel immediately, and it was quite a while before they were able to create a response. So that was one part. They also took an opportunity to target one of the senior leaders that were in there, and also an intelligence leader and his number two in the days that followed. So they've been doing these opportunity targeting. And then 4 days later, the general that was appointed to replace the commander of the IRGC, he was also killed by Israeli forces. So really targeted, really effective missions that have seriously degraded the leadership capability of the Iranian forces. Now, that on its own is not a decisive blow, but it has set the conditions to target the rest of the country. They have gone after the three facility sites. So Natanz and Fordow are the top two. Natanz has been apparently targeted quite effectively. They have delivered bunker busting weapons into the actual centrifuge locations. To give you a quick breakdown of how this works, if you're trying to enrich uranium, it's normally quite a heavy element. The atomic number is 238. you're trying to separate it into uranium-235, which is a uranium isotope. It's only fractionally lighter than the other isotope. To separate it from uranium, they have to put it into these centrifuges. They run gas through them. They run them at extremely high speeds. So these centrifuges are really, really delicate, really intensive, really precise pieces of equipment. They have to run for long periods of time to separate the uranium as they stand. This used to happen at Oakmont in Tennessee in America. This is where they originally developed all the uranium and refined all the uranium for their nuclear weapons they built during the Trinity tests and during the Manhattan Project in World War II. So they targeted these nuclear weapons facilities. Not just that, they targeted some of the scientists and the physicists that were working on these nuclear weapons. And I heard this comparison in the New York Times. Someone said this is like the equivalent of if you had killed Robert Oppenheimer and his top team at the very start of the Trinity Project, right? They would have been unable to finish the bomb. So Israel's plan is to try and absolutely reduce Iran's nuclear capability or their ability to develop weapons. They want to completely cut it down to zero. Now, that's where this is interesting. It's not actually a state-on-state conflict in the sense that militaries are directly confronting each other. Israel does have a really defined aim. And the Americans have said it too. Even the president, the sitting president, has said Iran can't have a bomb. They can't have a bomb. It's as simple as that. The reason they don't want it to have a bomb is because they have threatened multiple times to wipe Israel out. Now, you've got to take these things seriously when people make claims like that. The Israelis have, and that's why they've chosen to reach out at this point. So at the tactical level, that's what they've done. Concentrate on really effective surprise with covert operations and sleeper agents that have been planned in Iran and working for decades. They focused on air superiority and they ran counter-leadership operations against their missile forces, the heads of their military, the intelligence officers, and also the scientists that were in charge of the nuclear program. So really strong opening, very effective. They've actually already, and I'm going to talk about the next part, which is the strategic component of this. The shifting ground for this occurred as far back as the October 12 attacks in 2023 on Israel. This was committed by Hamas. They are traditionally backed by Iran. This has allowed, or it's given Israel the opportunity to reach out, really reshape and defeat Hamas as much as they can. Reach out and defeat Hezbollah as much as they can, including reducing their missile capabilities. I had encountered Hezbollah to some extent in 2008 when I was in Lebanon. They are a really impressive force. So the fact that Israel was able to do that, to target Hezbollah operatives using these covert operations, including these pages that harmed up to 3,500 operators, that's classic covert operation stuff that Israel are pulling off there. So as Iran has been weakened over time, they've used this opportunity now that their proxies are weakened to actually take the opportunity to mitigate the threat that they've seen for a really long time. Successive US presidents, President Obama and President Biden, were not keen for Israel to go up against or target Iran. And even Trump was the same. He actually told Netanyahu not to attack them several months back. So what's changed? I think what's changed now is Israel's gotten to the point where they know the window of opportunity is closing. Iran was rebuilding its missile defenses after the attacks that happened last year. So really, now those proxies have been weakened. The nuclear sites, the actual refinement sites for uranium have been targeted. However, the key one is Fordow. Now, the reason this is so interesting is because this is buried deep within a mountainside. Some estimates include 500 meters of overhead cover, like mountainous cover, to protect this facility. The reason this is so interesting is because the only force that can actually reach that far underground, and even that's questionable, is the United States. So they have developed the massive ordnance penetrator, the MOP guided bomb unit, GBU. I think it's a GBU 57. Anyway, this thing is massive. It's 30,000 pounds or it's 14 tons, and it can penetrate up to 100 meters of reinforced concrete and deliver an explosive to a target. So think about how much that is. Think about a 10 meter thick layer of reinforced concrete. That is a thick slab of material. This thing is designed to penetrate that far into the ground. And from what I understand, the US only has about 20 in its arsenal, uses super hardened metal, tungsten. Even the explosives have their polymer bonded explosives so they can take the force of actually putting a missile that far into a mountain. And the only way they're going to be able to do it is to strike the same point repeatedly with these missiles and try and dig their way into the bunkers to try and destroy those weapons. Now, there is another scenario, and that is that there could be a special forces raid on these facilities. Now, I actually think this is the most likely operation that's going to happen. I think that Israel, with American support, is probably going to send their commandos in. They've been planning this for a very long time. In fact, to the point where when I was at business school, short story, I had a friend of mine that was in the 160th SOAR. So they're called the Night Stalkers. They are special ops regiment that does all the aviation for JSOC. And he was a Black Hawk pilot and a Little Bird pilot, and he'd been involved in some of the planning for these missions. They were largely considered one-way, almost suicide missions to get into these facilities to destroy them. If you got into any of these facilities, chances are you were not going to be able to get back out. I know that planning has gone on for special ops raids on these facilities, and I think it's actually the most likely proposition is that they are going to send special forces in to try and conduct these missions. It's the only way to be sure, I think, that you've actually targeted it. So that's just an interesting aside there. If they don't do that, the US might be the ones who deliver the ordnance onto that target. Well, they're the only ones who can do it. Because these weapons are so big and so heavy, only the B-2 bomber can carry them. And the US is the only country that can actually deliver those weapons to target. What's interesting is there were 6 B-2 bombers stationed at Diego Garcia not that long. I think it was early as April. And this might be part of leveraging the threat of force, trying to leverage negotiations as it goes along. The US is trying to convince Iran not to enrich, not to have a nuclear weapons program. And it's just come down to a debate between Iran's sovereignty and the allies trying to tell Iran they're not allowed to produce any nuclear weapons. So that's where it gets quite interesting. So you got this whole scenario happening. Israel's taking a huge gamble. President Trump is now saying we may get involved. Now, the reason that's concerning is because if the United States does get involved to try and deal the killer blow to their nuclear weapons systems, there is a chance it could expand into a regional war, which means that Iran could target American bases, and that includes in the United Arab Emirates, in Iraq, in Oman, in various other parts of the Middle East. They could then try and reach out and hit American assets, which would not be good. So this is getting to a point where it's a very big gamble, and if Israel succeeds in basically neutralizing the Iranian nuclear weapons program, they'll have reshaped and secured the Middle East, at least from their perspective, for quite a while. So this is a huge gamble that's happening at the moment. The big question is the political side of this. What is the United States going to do? There's a couple of concerning things that I've seen in the last probably 24 hours. Multiple, up to 24 air-to-air refueling aircraft that are making their way out of the United States and heading east at the moment to Europe. Now, the reason that's concerning is because as another carrier battle groups steaming through the Straits of Malacca heading towards Iran with their guided weapons destroyers and their submarines with land attack missiles, this all points towards a really serious force package heading over there with a lot of air-to-air refueling capability for airborne missions against Iran. So the question is this a bluff in order to try and get Iran to the negotiating table, or are they serious? And in my view, I actually think they're dead serious. I think they're going to appeal to Iran to give up their program and to let inspectors into these sites, or they're going to be bombed by the United States and the United States will join the war. I think that's what will happen. I think Iran won't allow inspectors in. Each member of this is caught in what you would call a commitment trap. They can't back down from their current positions, so I don't know where this is going to end. From what I understand, in the opening stages of the war, the Israelis did have, and potentially the Americans did have, Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. They had him in their sights. They were interested in targeting him. From what I understand, President Trump, President of the United States, walked that back and did not allow them to target it. I think that's, at this stage, a smart move. I think that if the US or Israel had gone after it, it could have had really, really aggravating consequences. But who knows? This is now a race. So the United States and Israel are racing towards trying to dismantle their nuclear program, while Iran at the moment will almost definitely be racing towards refining and constructing a nuclear weapon, because they believe that's the only chance they have at self-preservation. And it is true. If you look at history, Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program, was unseated and killed not long after. Saddam Hussein, no different. You can understand why dictators want to acquire nuclear weapons. It really is the ace up the sleeve. It's the one thing that will ensure that the allies will probably not invade your country if you have a nuclear weapon. So in that sense, it is understandable. However, the United States and Israel are willing to go to war and have gone to war to prevent Iran from acquiring this weapon. So watch this space. These next couple of days are going to be extremely intense. I really hope it can stabilize, and yeah, that's my take.